Hey, folks, welcome to the Everyday Millionaire Mindset Matters. Steffany, welcome back.
Hey, hun.
So, your job was on the line. Last episode, Nick Banks stepped in. We had an amazing conversation.
I
And
can
so,
be replaced? What?
yeah, you're replaceable. I'm just saying, so you better be nice to me because I know how to run the technology. You don't.
You do. And you know what? I have to say, I listened to it and it was a really good conversation. I'm
Yeah.
not sure if it's dropped yet, but wow, you and Nick really went there. I loved it.
So, yeah, no, Nick is awesome. And what that led to and was leading up to was a conversation he and I had many times about doing a men's group. Now, we launched Shift and ended up with a all men's cohort as part of the Shift program, which was really cool, and how that all unfolded. And we've talked many times about I've talked many times about doing a men's group. So if you're listening and you happen to be in the BC, specifically Langley area, you can watch for the Everyday Millionaire Facebook page and or the website and or some marketing that we'll do. But I am doing, and you're going to join me. That's maybe freak some men out already. But a men's night, a men's evening, getting together and looking at things that I guess really I'm titling it Inner Warrior, and what that means, and having some really cool conversation with men. It's a $20 drop in, register, and that's it. $20. Come on by. It's in Langley at the Sandman. What's it called? Sandman Inn, I guess.
Salmon Sweets, I think, on 200th and just off Highway 1.
Yeah. So if you happen to be listening to this and you're in the area, it's October 30th. It'll go from 7 to 9, 7 to 9:30. It'll be amazing. We got some really cool stuff lined up on the agenda, and Steffany's going to bring her many years of working in a world of men in her NHL career, and really looking at and talking about inner warrior and masculinity, and what is it being a man in 2023, and dealing with all the things that men are dealing with family and relationships and peers. And oh my gosh, there's so much to talk about. We'll not get it all done in one night for sure, but this is just kind of a test and see if there's a demand out there for men that want to get into a room full of other like-minded men and have some meaningful conversation. How's that?
Honestly, I've been waiting for this. You've been talking about this for a long time,
I
dude.
know. I know.
So I'm just so proud of you for doing this, and the fact that you and Nick had this conversation while I was away. I mean,
Mhm.
what's so cool about it is that the timing couldn't be better. I'm seeing, for me, the sacred masculine just being vilified everywhere, whether it's in business or sport or in family or in
Everywhere.
faith-based. It's everywhere, and I think in order for us to move through this and navigate what's happening right now in the world is that we need to connect to the values of the sacred masculine. And I call it that because I also work within the realm of human development, which means we have a balance between the masculine and the feminine. It's not male and female, it's not gender, it's not sex. It's about energy and it's about what we're bringing. And I'm so proud of you that you're doing this.
Well, thanks. Well, we're going to have some fun doing it, and have some really positive impact on some men's lives. Okay, today's topic. It kind of in line with it, but it's a weird one. But I know that men are really uncomfortable with this word. Many men are, not all men. I'm not, but many men are. And I know men who aren't, but I know many men who are. Okay, the magic word. Ready for this? Intimacy.
Oh
Oh
wow.
my gosh. Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
This is, intimacy is, I think, a misunderstood word, mostly by men. I think by women as well sometimes, because they have expectations. But you tell me this. I think women just, they come out of the chute. They're just, the genetic predisposition is understanding intimacy. Or is that true? Or am I just full of shit?
Well, I can't speak for all women. I'll try to speak for myself and the women that I've had the privilege of working with and being friends with. Is that early on, for me, I was able to define the word intimacy as into me see.
Mm,
intimacy. So in order to connect with other people, I needed to know who I was, and I needed to know what mattered to me and what scared me and what lit me up and what fucked me up and all that kind of stuff. Is that it's where we're not able to share our
mm,
deepest, darkest. And I remember somebody saying to me once is that in order to be intimate, you need to be able to show up for yourself first and
mhm,
others, warts and all.
mhm,
Warts and all. Like I got a shit ton of warts, and I think about, the people that I've worked with over the years, and even you and I, as we've worked through our stuff, is that there's layers of stuff that in our past that could stay hidden, but it also gets in the way of what we want to do in terms of connection, in terms of
mm.
communication, in terms of, I don't know, just like you say, living our best life and being kind and being grounded.
Yeah, well, let's and when we look at the what you just shared there, that comes back to some level of authenticity. Can you be authentic? And that's not to say that any space you walk into, you always are there being authentic, but intimacy goes to the next level, and that means that putting yourself in an environment, creating relationship, that's where intimacy lives. Having meaningful conversation is not something that you can have with just anybody because you are, number one, exposing yourself. I think that could be number one. There's no point to it. I think it's a little dangerous, from a conversational point of view. You may mess people up when you start and you show up that way. So intimacy is a very kind of private thing. In private, I mean, it's not broadcast out to the world. I don't know. Can you be really intimate in a big,
Hey, you
if you're sitting on
know,
the stage? I guess you could. Jordan
yeah.
Peterson. We went to Jordan Peterson. We had really cool tickets, and he had a conversation with 100 people afterwards. Went from 6,000 to 100 people, and it was a pretty intimate conversation. Patrick Bet David, he did it. He was pretty intimate with a group of people, I think. What's your thoughts on that?
You really bring up a good point because I think where the vulnerability or the fear lives with most people is that if they feel that they're going to be intimate, it's going to make a lifelong decision or they have to get married and, forever and ever, amen. It's
Hmm.
not that. Like for me, it's so I want to connect with people. And
Okay.
in the past, I used to really freak people out because my initial reaction is connection. And
Hmm.
people would be scared about that, and they'd be like, "She is way too deep and looking at
Hmm.
way too personal stuff, and I don't wanna share that shit with her. I don't know what she's gonna do with it."
Yeah.
What I realized is that where people will shut down around intimacy is that they're scared to show who they are because they've been hurt.
Hmm.
They've been hurt, and people have taken the information or that
Yeah.
intimacy and really used it against them, and that was never on my radar. I mean, I was raised in a family where you gotta bring your stuff and your best self and your worst shit to the dinner table and clear it up and talk it out so that you can go out and be the best self in your out in the world. That's not
Hmm.
normal. I had to
Hmm.
unlearn that with certain people, especially as an adult. On stage, it's different. With my clients, it's different. I get it. I can find a way of being intimate by being authentic myself, but not demanding that from somebody else or not requesting that from somebody else because some people just aren't ready to just lift their kilt, so to speak.
Yeah. 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 So let's start by defining it. I mean, we often do that. I like to kind of give it a foundation. So if we define intimacy, based on some version of, I don't know, dictionary, it is that intimacy, regardless of gender, refers to the close and deep connection between individuals in a relationship. There. Now, there's a key point that I just want to not step over in a relationship.
Mhm.
So it involves emotional, physical, and often intellectual or spiritual closeness. It's essential to recognize that intimacy is a universal human need and experience. And as definition doesn't actually signify or it isn't based on gender. So, having said all of that, the way individuals perceive and express intimacy can actually be quite different from person to person, and that could be based on cultural differences. And I think that's an interesting one. We see that culturally, that intimacy is different. And social and, of course, personal factors play into intimacy. So, when we look at intimacy from a definition point of view, it is about relationship. We have to make sure, and it is actually a human need. We need intimacy at some level. And so, lack of intimacy in somebody's life can really show up or manifest into different ways in terms of how we behave or how we hide emotions or how we're not emotional or how we're overly emotional. And so there are indicators, for example, if you're lacking intimacy. And we can break those down if you want, but what's your thoughts so far?
Oh man, like this is such a big topic. And I realize that when I look at myself and my need for connection and my ability to tell the truth about that is I would rather have that connection with somebody and drop my guard and risk somebody hurting me than not having that connection with and feeling that connection of intimacy. I don't know. This is hard for me because I look at my clients, I look at my skaters, I look at how you and I communicate. I look at how our chosen family communicates. That's what I want in my life. It doesn't mean that everybody has to go down that path and we have to go super deep with everybody. And
Yeah,
sometimes
no,
it's
that's no.
just a superficial conversation. But the truth
Mhm.
is, somewhere in our lives, we need as human beings, one of our highest drivers is connection.
So having conversations with somebody doesn't mean that, my point was that you can only talk about the weather and kind of high level, meaningless conversations, for so long. And then it's like, okay, I don't want to keep sharing stories from the past. I don't want to keep having meaningless small talk conversations. I think most people don't like those and they get tiresome really fast if you have any awareness around it. And being and having an intimate conversation doesn't necessarily mean you're talking about yourself either. It is really talking about things that matter to the person or the people that are you're having a conversation with. And it is more about, those meaningful kind of conversations, that things that do impact our lives emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually. Those can get, I guess, pretty deep, but ultimately that's where the intimacy lives, is having those conversations and being able to have those conversations and actually feeling safe in having them. And that's one of the keys to having an intimate conversation. And I know in relationship, I don't want to say I know, my experience has been with in having conversations with men who are struggling in relationship, as I listen to them talk about their wife, their daughters generally, but even sometimes their sons, they lack this understanding that an intimate conversation is sometimes just listening to somebody have a conversation, especially in the world of women and men in relationship. I mean, when we think about intimacy, there was back in the day, there was women, and what were they doing? They were quilting. And why were they quilting? Because women need women. They need to have those conversations, but women need to have those conversations with men as well. So I'll stop there. What's your thoughts?
Well, you bring up a couple good points is that in order to have a level of intimacy with someone else, you also have to know what matters to you and what is into me see, like what matters to me, so that I
Mm-hmm.
can bring up a conversation with you. So for example, I used to go to parties and I was such an introvert, even though I was on stage and in the NHL and Olympic performance coach. It's like I don't have a big personality. So what was really helpful for me, so instead of asking people what they do, "Hey, so what do you do?"
Mm-hmm.
I would say, "What do you love to do?"
Mm-hmm.
"Hey, hi, I'm Stephanie. I'm a, da 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 da. I'm here and I'm," whether it was you and I at a party or something, and I would just ask somebody, "What do you love to do?" And it changed the conversation because it wasn't about what they did for a living because that's so base. That's so I'm not interested. Yes, if it lights you up, I'm super interested.
Mm-hmm.
But what if they're, a computer programming, but they love horses? I would rather talk about what they love to do. And to me, that's intimacy. That's
Mm-hmm.
whether I never see that person again or not. I had a conversation that mattered not just to them, but to me. So for
Mm-hmm.
me, it's conversations that matter. It's not about sharing. I mean, I can be exhausted at the end of a night after a party that means nothing. I mean, we used to go to fundraisers and some really amazing and high level and big money people, and nobody gave a shit about what was really going on. And that was exhausting to me. So I think it's defining your own level of what you need to connect.
Well, I get but I think there's also, we have to consider some of the challenges that we face in relationships. So I'm going to give an example. So, what are some of the signs that we're lacking intimacy, for
Mm.
example? And, we have to say, okay, well, what are you guys talking about? And how do I know if I'm not in an intimate relationship, or how do I know that I'm lacking it? And we can spot it, and you can spot it in conversation, because there's an emotional distancing that happens. It's one of the, I think the most common things that starts to happen is that a person is avoiding having any kind of a deep emotional connection. They don't want to share what's going on in terms of how they're feeling about certain things, or they're very guarded, or they're really struggling to express their emotions in an open and really in an honest way. And we see that men are famous for that, right? It's like wives wanting to connect with their husbands. How was your day? What's going on? You seem upset. Nothing, nothing, nothing. And they take it on and they carry the weight. And it really is the avoidance of having those intimate conversations, because many men, whether it be how they're brought up or the story they're telling themselves about a man, is that you carry that weight. You're a man, you're a warrior. You're not sharing how you feel about that, because of course that's what all the war movies show. There isn't intimacy in those movies. There isn't, many young men growing up, their fathers lack that intimacy. I was that person. I mean, my dad, the last thing, I mean, he was one of those guys that the word intimacy had a totally different meaning to him. So I think when we look at saying, well, how do I know if I'm missing it, or somebody in my life is not willing to be intimate, it's often covering up those things, right? What's your thoughts?
Well, it's funny you bring that up, and I think you look back over time, as in your 20s and 30s, and intimacy could just have meant sex. It could have just
Mhm.
been physical intimacy. It's like that is what, for me, what a lot of guys, and because I spend a lot of time working with men, is that intimacy meant, can I get laid?
Mhm.
Can is there sex involved, or foreplay, or that's intimacy. I'm touching you and I'm touching your boobs, and that's intimacy. So, and then they're with a girl or a woman who's saying, "No, I want to connect. I want you to ask me how I'm doing. I want to know how you're doing." So,
Mhm.
your definition of intimacy could be different. And as you evolve through the generations and through the decades of life, as intimacy can change. I mean,
Mhm.
right now, I mean, my heart is so full because we've got 6 puppies, and 2 dogs, that my heart is giantly open, and it makes me feel more connected to you, which to me is an intimate experience together. And I don't know if that's been presented over time, that these kinds of experiences are entry points into intimacy and connection with people.
Yeah, and I mean, let's face it. There's all sorts of, well, there's different types of intimacy, right? So we often are talking about emotional intimacy, or connected mentally, emotionally, spiritually, right? So there is the physical intimacy, and there's intellectual intimacy, and there's spiritual, and that spiritual intimacy. But there's also trust and vulnerability.
Mm.
Having trust and being vulnerable is a level or a layer of intimacy that people can get into. And interesting enough, um, what, and I don't want to step over being able to spend time with each other. That's, you are very much that way. You just want to, you sometimes remind me of Echo and Rango. We don't have to talk. I just want you in my space. Come hang out with me. Okay, well, what? I got things to do. Well, no, I just want you in my space. So for you, that being present to that is part of, that's intimacy for you too. That's a part of what fills that cup for you.
Totally.
Am I wrong about that? I don't think I am.
Yeah, no, totally. And that's what's interesting, is that you don't have to do anything or say anything. For me, just being in there and connecting, and
Mhm.
being in the experience of us as a team and as a couple. And then what that gives me is that it fills a bucket in a way, like if you look down, I don't know if we've ever talked about it, but the five love languages, is
Mhm.
that there's really that too, is that we have to understand who we are, in a sense of what fills our cup in terms of intimacy and love language. I want to hang out with you because I like you, and I like you, and then I want to talk to you, and then if you don't want to talk, then we can do stuff, or we can have a common, interest in the puppies, and then I want to have sex with you. So
Mhm.
things lead to physical intimacy, But if you don't know that about the other person, then there could be a lot of blocks in, like,
Mhm.
in some, for some reason, some guys are saying, like, my wife doesn't want to have sex with me and she doesn't find me attractive, or I don't find her attractive.
Mhm.
Well, maybe there's something in this intimacy conversation that they could learn from.
100%. And there's a part of it too where part of intimacy is affection and
Mhm.
appreciation. But it's interesting about affection. You can have affection, but if it lacks it, if there isn't an appreciation in behind it, it lacks kind of that next layer of intimacy.
Yeah, and that
And
authenticity.
yeah, and authenticity. So, when you look and you break it down, but let's go back a little bit and just talk about, I think, where we see the breakdown. As we're working with clients, we have these different conversations and we start to understand that as people are sharing what they're going through and what's happening for them, there's that emotional distance that is showing up. That's often either showing up for somebody who's at the effect of it in a relationship, but there's also, or it could be that person that is not willing to let their guard down, that actually feels that, sharing those kind of fears, if you will, or what they're going through mentally, emotionally, spiritually, is actually a sign of weakness. Men do that.
Right.
And, I go back to what I said before is that so many men get confused by what the word intimacy and what being intimate really means. So there's also lacking. If there's a physical disconnect, intimacy is really an essential part of any kind of close relationship, including our romantic partnerships. But if somebody is actually avoiding physical touch or sexual intimacy with their partner, it could actually indicate a real lack of intimacy, because that's what people need. And it could be a lot of things that just, I don't want to I don't want to touch you, I don't want to hug you. That's, again, that could be a sign that intimacy is breaking down. And then, of course, communication issues. That's a big one, right? If intimacy requires communication,
That could be
and
a whole podcast.
that could be a whole podcast, and having really meaningful conversations.
And
And
what I love about this conversation, hun, is that I feel like when we do these conversations is that it just shows a level of intimacy for us, and because we sometimes we fight in order to get to this. Like, we want to have a topic and then we fight to align, but we don't ever shut each other down. And to me, there's a trust that is grounded, that builds that intimacy. And I'm wondering if maybe one of the conversations we can have going forward is, when trust gets broken, so does intimacy.
yeah, 100%. But there's something here I want to just kind of get to, because sometimes it's misunderstood, I think. So we talk about emotional intimacy, and emotional intimacy, it really requires someone to share their thoughts or feelings, fears, where they're feeling vulnerable, and they're doing that with somebody that they trust and that they care about, or that cares about them, and is being really open, empathetic, and then you can listen and have these conversations. But there is an intellectual intimacy, and the intellectual intimacy involves sharing ideas and interest, and engaging in meaningful conversations that are more intellectual, and they're stimulating from a like mentally stimulating, but that's also a connection with somebody else. It's still a very intimate conversation. So when I think about this podcast right now, this is a pretty intimate conversation for a podcast, I think. Maybe not. Which
No,
thoughts?
yeah, I agree, and I think that's what, you know, Cheryl sent us a note the other day, and she's cracking up because there's sometimes we argue on a podcast and we are trying to figure shit out as we go, and but to me, that's a level of intimacy that we're willing to share with our listeners because we don't have a filter on being judged. And I
Mhm.
think with the Bumble and the Tinder and the grinder, kind of culture that we've got going on right now is that it's generated with the physical intimacy first. And if that connection isn't there, then we don't get a chance to, or people that are in that world aren't getting a chance to get to that level of intellectual and or emotional intimacy because they're
Mhm.
looking, they're swiping right or they're swiping left, and it's all sexual or it's all physical attraction, which is, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but there's a place where, I'm not getting any younger.
It's a human need. I think that's the key. But having said all of that, there are things culturally that can get in the way, or not even get in the way. It's just that's what it is culturally, But it's understanding that and bringing your awareness to the relationship that, what is the gap in a relationship that you're stepping over, or where is, and this is mostly, I think in this conversation, relationship is not just significant others, but it's actually friends and the quality of friends. And, as you know, I mean, I could count on one hand the number of men that I can have really meaningful conversations with. And, I've been around on this planet a long time doing this work, but yet to really go where I like to go in terms of intimate conversations with men, it's not a lot. It's and this is, again, goes to the, shift program where I'm doing the inner warrior, which is, it's being and introducing the concept of having those kind of conversations with other men and being in a space where you can actually share those thought processes and be safe to do so. So,
Especially if they've never had it. Like,
yeah,
I look at the players, the hockey players. I was in the NHL for almost 15 years, and one of the hardest things for me was to watch men not be able to connect with their teammates on a level that could actually empower them to be better players, to be better teammates, to be better fathers and husbands, because there were so many archetypes that they were trying to, and personas they were trying to try on, instead of just figuring out who they are, what they wanted, and then bringing that forward. It's a little bit different now. I'm seeing, you know, different athletes are bringing more of that level of masculinity and masculine
100%.
intimacy.
Yeah,
But there's also a place where it's being made wrong. And I think that's why it's so important. And I'm so excited that you're doing this work with the inner warrior, because it's not even the inner warrior as much as it's, do you trust yourself to put yourself out there in an environment that you're choosing? Because if you're choosing this environment, for example, in shift, we've already vetted these people. These guys they're willing to open themselves up, but they also know they're not going to be judged. They're not going to be humiliated. They're not going to be shut down. And I think that's the biggest fear of a lot of guys.
yeah, 100%. And it shows weakness. I think so many guys think that. But listen, intimacy just isn't about men and being intimate. And, I'm not suggesting that men need to go out and cry their hearts out. Like, that's not it. That has nothing to do with any of it. The point is can we have meaningful conversations, men and women, in our relationships? Are you realizing that, or are you aware that maybe you need to sit down and have meaningful conversations, whether you're whatever significant other, whatever gender, regardless. Intimacy is about having meaningful conversations and actually getting that need met. And some people may be listening to this right now and go, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. I don't need any of that shit. So if you're that person, okay, good. That's fine too. It's nothing wrong.
Not
It's to
wrong.
bring awareness to it. Okay. I don't know whose idea was intimacy. I still like the topic, but
I
I
think it
think
was yours and Jadine's. I wasn't involved. I was like hanging with the dogs.
Jadine's fault. Okay, I love it. I love it. So that's all I got. Anything you want to do to wrap this up?
Oh my gosh. To me, this is one of my favorite topics. And I don't know if we've really connected it to Mindset Matters, but the truth is, intimacy is a thought process. It's, are you willing to be exposed and vulnerable? Share who you are, share your thoughts, share your feelings. And then, if people don't accept you, okay. But the only way people can hurt you is with your permission. But if, for me, I'm willing to show up, to be intimate, to connect. And if people reject me, I'm like, okay, your loss. And
I think there's
so
a part of. Oh, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead. Finish.
that's fine. Carry on.
No, I was just going to say that we haven't really connected it to mindset, and I think that it's all mindset. I think
That's
that
all.
there is a understanding that what makes us better people is being able to have conversations that matter, to talk it through, to actually have a conversation with somebody that we can be vulnerable, that we can put what we're thinking, feeling, put it out there, and have somebody mirror back maybe even what they're hearing, even though they can be empathetic and have compassion and all the rest of it. They can sometimes hold up a mirror and say, well, maybe there's another way to look at this. Maybe you're living into an old story, and maybe it's just a meaningful conversation for you that day, and it isn't any more than that, but at least you got to express it in a space that you felt safe doing that. That's healthy. That's healthy for the mindset. It's healthy for the mind, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. It's good stuff. That's all I
Yeah,
got.
let's exclamation point on that, babe.
Okay. Listen, thanks. Thanks for sharing. Listen, thanks for this intimate conversation.
I know that was fun, and I'll see you on October 30th.
I'll be there.
Me too. That was fun.